Sophie's scream cut through the desert air like a blade. I sprinted toward the park, heart in my throat, just in time to see Marcia Vickers standing over my daughter, shovel in hand, her prosthetic leg shattered at her side. "No more flowers," Marcia snarled as Sophie cried, chalk dust mixing with blood on the sun-baked concrete. I'm bolting down the front steps of our stucco home, in Desert Bloom Hills, heart-pounding, fists clenched, barely able to breathe, not from the New Mexico heat, but from the rage simmering in my chest. I just opened our mailbox and found the third violation notice this month, this time with a fine of $300 for unauthorized visual disruption on public property. Translation: my 13-year-old daughter Sophie had drawn tulips on the sidewalk again. That's her crime chalk, tulips. Bright pinks, radiant oranges, glowing yellows, each one blooming from the concrete like a miracle after rain. And apparently that's too much color for Marcia Vickers, the neighborhood dictator, disguised as the HOA president. She's 61, 5'0" of tight floral dresses and tighter control, with a voice like dry gravel and a glare that could curdle milk. Her mission: keep Desert Bloom Hills refined. Her target: my daughter. Sophie's always been a fighter. 2 years ago, she lost her right leg in a skiing accident that would have crushed most adults, let alone a kid. But not her. She tackled rehab like it was a game, named her Prosthetic tulip, and started painting the world in color again, literally. She picked up chalk one day and never stopped. Her art started as little doodles, flowers, birds' hearts, but soon turned into full murals. Massive fields of tulips blooming across our driveway, butterflies with wings like stained glass. For Sophie, it's therapy. Her doctor calls it art-based trauma recovery. I call it her spark. But Marcia calls it vandalism. We'd moved to Desert Bloom Hills for a fresh start. The homes are pristine, the hedges trimmed like topiary. It's the kind of place that gets featured in retirement brochures, quiet, beige, predictable. We thought it'd be safe, peaceful, healing. But within a week of settling in, Sophie's chalk art had Marcia knocking on our door, heels clicking like a metronome of judgment. She stood there with her laminated clipboard and a pinched expression that said she'd rather be anywhere else but near our family. "Mr. Briggs," she said, nose wrinkled like she smelled spoiled milk, "your daughter's graffiti is in violation of HOA guidelines. Sidewalks must remain neutral in tone." I stared at her. It's chalk. It washes off with rain. She didn't blink. Neutral in tone. I'm a former FBI hostage negotiator. I've talked down armed bank robbers, meth-fueled barricaders, and one guy who tried to hold his ex-wife hostage with a cheese grater. I've kept my cool through sniper standoffs and midnight raids. But this woman, this clipboard-wielding tyrant, nearly made me snap. Still, I kept my voice calm. "It's therapeutic. Her doctor signed off on it. She's a kid trying to heal. She can heal in her bedroom," Marcia replied, lips tight. "This neighborhood is not an art gallery." My wife Lana overheard and stepped in. She's an ER nurse, brilliant, level-headed, fierce when it counts. She took one look at Marcia and said, "Have a little compassion. She's 13. She lost her leg. She's finding joy. Why would you take that from her?" Marcia responded with a smirk and turned on her heel, tossing a violation notice over her shoulder like a grenade. That was 2 months ago. Since then, the fines have rolled in like clockwork. $100 for repeat violations, $150 for unauthorized artistic display, $200 for community disruption. Each time I document everything. I've installed 4 ultra-wide security cameras around our property, same ones we use during field ops in the Bureau. High-resolution, low-light audio embedded. I'm not just a dad anymore, I'm building a case. Marcia, though, she's not slowing down. If anything, she's escalating. She started putting up HOA notices with photos of Sophie's chalk drawings, full-color printouts tacked to mailboxes, and park bulletin boards with captions like, "This is not beauty, it's blight." She handed out flyers at the last community cookout. Flyers about a child's chalk art. One of them had the headline, "Protect our community from visual decay." Neighbors started acting differently. Mrs. Gibbons, who used to wave at Sophie during her morning walks, suddenly crosses the street. The Ramirez twins' kids Sophie used to play tag with have been too busy to hang out. Whispers follow us. I've seen the way some parents look at her like she's trouble. All for tulips. Sophie tries to stay strong. She pretends it doesn't hurt. But I know my daughter. I see her hesitating now before she picks up her chalk. She looks over her shoulder. She double-checks the sidewalk like she's doing something illegal. It's eating at her, and I'm done. Lana and I sit down that night and go over the therapy notes again. Her psychologist clearly states the art is integral to Sophie's emotional recovery. I scan and print copies, add them to the growing folder labeled HOA, harassment. I even start cataloging the drawings themselves, photographing each one before the rain washes it away. Each tulip, each butterfly, evidence. Marcia doesn't know who she's dealing with. I've negotiated with terrorists. She's just another control freak with a badge she gave herself. But still, she's dangerous. Not because she's powerful, but because people listen to her. That's what scares me. She's poisoning the community one whisper at a time. Sophie came to me last night. She had a new design in her sketchbook, a massive tulip garden with a phoenix rising behind it. For the park, she said quietly. Think I can draw it there next weekend? I forced a smile. Of course. It's beautiful. But inside my stomach turned. I knew what would happen if she did, and I knew I'd be ready. The next morning, another fine, this one for failure to maintain a neutral aesthetic on publicly visible property. $300. With it, a photo of Sophie's most recent drawing, a ring of tulips around a chalk dove, hand-delivered by Marcia herself. I opened the front door before she knocked. You're trespassing, I said. She didn't flinch. Your daughter continues to violate community standards. This is your final warning. You've been warned too, Marcia, I said, voice like ice. You're harassing a disabled child. You've got no legal basis. And I've got hours of footage and documentation. Her lips twitched. I suggest you speak to your lawyer. I smiled. I already have. She turned without another word, but I could see her shoulders stiffen. The war had officially begun. Back inside, I found Sophie sitting on the floor with her chalk laid out in rows like paint tubes. She was working on a new design, a single tulip with roots that twisted into the shape of her name. Hey, Dad, she said, not looking up. Do you think flowers can fight back? I knelt beside her, throat tight. If they're your flowers, kiddo, they can do anything. And that was it, my line in the sand. My daughter was not going to be erased. Not by Marcia, not by fear, not by a neighborhood obsessed with beige uniformity. She was going to draw, and if that meant I had to go full FBI on a suburban HOA queenpin, so be it. The camera feeds were live. The evidence was growing, and I could feel the tension rising like heat off the pavement. This wasn't just about chalk anymore. This was about resilience, about color, about a girl with one leg who refused to stop blooming, and Marcia Vickers had just declared war on the wrong garden. The morning after Sophie asked if flowers could fight back Desert Bloom Hills felt quieter than usual, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The sky was a faded blue, the kind that looks innocent, but holds heat like a grudge, and the sidewalks were blank canvases waiting for color. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, her prosthetic leg crossed beneath her chair, sketching her tulip phoenix while nibbling toast. Her face was calm, but I knew that look. It wasn't peace, it was resolve. The kind I used to see on agents right before a raid. You sure you want to do this at the park, I asked? She looked up. Yeah, I want the flowers to grow where everyone can see them. I nodded and kissed the top of her head, fighting the surge of pride and dread rising in my chest. I knew Marcia Vickers wouldn't let it go. Not after our last exchange. It didn't take long for the next move. That afternoon, a man in a pressure-washing truck rolled through the neighborhood like a hired gun. I watched from our ring feed as he blasted away Sophie's tulip borders, erasing them petal by petal, leaving behind soaked concrete and a $500 invoice taped to our door. Community beautification, the attached note read. Authorized by HOA president. I checked the footage, filed it under incident number 14, and poured myself a coffee I didn't even want. Sophie watched the video silent. They sprayed my butterflies too, she finally said, voice hollow. They said they were scaring dogs. Lana pulled her into a hug, whispering comfort, but I saw the slump in her shoulders. I'd seen that before, victims blaming themselves. That's when I called Carlos Vega. Carlos had been my right hand during hostage negotiations. Now he did contract intelligence work in Santa Fe. I need audio, I told him. We're way past visual. Within a day, he drove down with a set of button mics and a dash cam upgrade that'd make the FBI jealous. We wired the front porch, the park bench, even Sophie's art kit bag. "We're not just defending your girl," he said as we installed a mic in a potted plant. "We're building a perimeter." And we needed it, because Marcia wasn't finished. She called an emergency HOA meeting the following week, and we went. Not because we expected fairness, but because we needed to see her cards. The community hall was full, more neighbors than usual. Some came for gossip, some came for spectacle, but none expected what Marcia brought. She dimmed the lights, clicked a remote, and up on a projector screen came Sophie's chalk tulips. Not just one or two, dozens, labeled and dated like crime scene evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcia began, her voice a purr with claws. "This is the visual decline of Desert Bloom Hills." Gasps echoed. Some real, some fake. We are a neighborhood built on harmony and order. What message are we sending with garish sidewalk graffiti polluting our walkways? She turned to the crowd. "What do the children learn?" Lana stood, fire in her eyes. "They learn joy. They learn healing. They learn that beauty matters more than beige." I followed, holding up Sophie's therapist's letter. "This isn't vandalism, it's recovery. It's what's keeping a 13-year-old girl who lost her leg from losing her spark." Marcia smiled like a cat. "The HOA board will vote on a motion to ban all unauthorized artistic expressions in shared spaces." A few neighbors clapped. Most looked uncomfortable, but it didn't matter. The motion passed, just like that color was outlawed. That weekend, Sophie didn't flinch. She rose early Saturday morning, strapped on her leg, packed her chalk, and headed to the park with Lana. I stayed home watching the feeds. My phone buzzed around noon. Sophie had finished the tulip phoenix. She'd drawn it at the edge of the playground in brilliant swirls of gold, crimson, and lavender, tulip petals rising into wings. Kids were gathering, smiling, snapping pictures. For a moment, she'd brought light back. But then the scream. The sound came through the front porch mic. High, sharp, raw. I dropped my coffee and sprinted outside, tearing across yards as fast as my legs would take me. I reached the park in under 2 minutes, lungs burning, sweat pouring down my back. And there she was, Sophie curled on the ground, her prosthetic legs shattered, the carbon fibers splintered like driftwood. Lana was beside her, cradling her blood on her arm. Over them stood Marcia Vickers, still gripping a gardening shovel. "No more flowers," she screamed, face red, eyes wild. A few neighborhood kids stood frozen. Some cried. A man, Tom, from 3 doors down, pulled out his phone and began filming. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I scooped Sophie into my arms, her face wet with tears, her fingers clenched around a piece of purple chalk. Lana followed, eyes blazing. I turned and locked eyes with Marcia. "You're done," I said. "You just buried yourself." Back home, I laid Sophie on the couch, Lana already cleaning her wounds. I pulled up the park camera feed. It was all there. Marcia's approach, her swing, the leg breaking, Sophie begging her to stop. I pressed record, then dialed 911. "Emergency. I need police and medical to Desert Bloom Hills Community Park. Minor injured, suspect HOA president, weapon used, surveillance captured, victim is disabled." The dispatcher's tone changed instantly. I hung up and called Carlos. "It happened," I said. "We got her. It's on tape." His voice was quiet steel. "I'm on my way. Sending backup from the bureau, too." "She's toast." The sirens came 10 minutes later. Flashing lights lit up the street. Sophie winced but didn't cry. She held my hand, whispering. She said, "Tulips don't belong in the desert." I kissed her forehead. "Then we'll plant 1,000. Officers took Marcia from her home, kicking and screeching. Carlos showed up not long after, driving a bureau SUV. He reviewed the footage with 2 federal agents. Assault with a deadly object on a disabled minor, one said. "She's not just HOA anymore. She's federal." I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Lana. But Sophie did finally, after the pain meds, curled up under her old quilt, one hand still clinging to a piece of chalk. Outside, the wind blew dust across the now erased phoenix, but its shape lingered faint like a ghost waiting to rise. I stared at the sidewalk, jaw tight. This wasn't the end. This was the moment everything changed. Carlos stayed over his laptop, open linking footage reports, incident logs. "We're going public," he said. "Whitney Kim at Channel 7's been chasing HOA corruption for years. This'll light her up." I nodded. "Send it." And by dawn, the file was in her inbox. Footage, audio, threats, fines, and one brutal clip of a woman smashing a child's prosthetic with a shovel. It was over for Marcia Vickers. But for Desert Bloom Hills, for Sophie, for every kid with chalk and a dream, this was just the beginning. The soil had been scorched, but the flowers would rise. Sirens split the heat of the desert afternoon as red and blue lights bled across the cream-colored walls of Desert Bloom Hills. I stood at our front gate, arms crossed over my chest, watching the patrol cars form a barricade at the end of our block. Sophie was asleep inside her broken prosthetic, laid neatly beside her bed like a wounded soldier. Lana sat by her side, cool cloth on her forehead, every so often, whispering, "You're safe now." But safe didn't begin to cover what I was about to ensure. The footage Carlos had pulled from our 4K park camera was damning Marcia Vickers in full sunlight. Shovel raised, her voice caught crystal clear, snarling "no more flowers" before smashing Sophie's prosthetic. Assault on a disabled child. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. I handed the raw video files to Carlos, who uploaded them directly to a secure server and fired off an email to Whitney Kim, Channel 7's toughest investigative reporter. I'd worked with her once during a domestic terrorism probe in Phoenix. She didn't just report stories, she detonated them. And by the time I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, she was calling my phone. "Nathan, please tell me this isn't stage," she said, her voice sharp, urgent. "Because if this is real, it's going live tonight." "It's real," I told her. "And it gets worse. She's been targeting my daughter for months. I've got documents, audio footage, HOA minutes, all of it." Whitney didn't hesitate. "Email me everything. I'll be at the park by 5 with a camera crew. Let's blow this HOA queen's crown off." An hour later, neighbors gathered around the community park, some in shame, some in outrage, some just morbidly curious. Whitney stood under the same tree where Sophie had drawn her Phoenix mural, now reduced to a faint outline of colored dust. Her cameraman adjusted the light, and when she began to speak, her voice rang across the lawn and into every living room in Albuquerque. "Tonight," she said, "we bring you a story of power, prejudice, and a little girl with one leg who dared to draw tulips." The segment aired at 6 p.m., just as Lana and I were eating leftovers in silence. On screen, the video played, Marcia looming over Sophie, the swing, the snap, Sophie's scream. And then the crowd reactions, Tom from down the block yelling, "Call 911 Whitney," narrating each act of cruelty Marcia had committed. Then came my interview, standing on our porch, arms at my sides, voice steady as I laid it all out. "She didn't just destroy a drawing," I said into the lens. "She tried to erase a child's joy." The story exploded. By 9 p.m., Desert Bloom assault was trending on Twitter. Hundreds of comments flooded in. "That woman should be in jail. Justice for Sophie. HOA power trip gone nuclear." The next morning, federal agents in Navy windbreakers rolled into the neighborhood. Carlos led them to Marcia's house, where she answered the door in a bathrobe and garden gloves, as if she'd just been pruning roses instead of weaponizing shovels. She protested. "Of course she did. I was defending the HOA standards," she cried. "I'm the victim." But the agents had the footage, the HOA records, and the list of fines she'd unilaterally authorized. She was cuffed on the porch as her flamingo statue watched silently. The charges: assault of a disabled minor, harassment, misuse of HOA funds, and civil rights violations. Marcia Vickers, the Queen of Beige, was dethroned. The HOA board scrambled. Half of them resigned within a day. The rest called an emergency meeting open to residents. Lana and I attended, and I'll never forget the hush that fell over the room when we walked in, Lana in her scrubs, still wearing her badge, me holding Sophie's broken prosthetic like evidence in a trial. Then came a surprise. Tom stood up. "I nominate Lana Briggs as interim HOA president," he said, voice shaking slightly. "She actually cares about the people who live here." Karen Thompson, Marcia's former second-in-command, raised her hand next. "I second that nomination." It wasn't even close. A vote passed unanimously. And just like that, my wife, the woman who'd once bandaged gunshot wounds during back-to-back ER shifts, was now running the HOA. First order of business. She passed what the board later dubbed the Tulip Law, a new bylaw that permanently protected children's sidewalk art, prohibited any harassment against disabled residents, and required all future HOA decisions involving fines or rules to go through a community vote. The shift was immediate. Karen, sheepish, brought over a basket of muffins. Tom and his wife dropped off sidewalk chalk and a handwritten card for Sophie. Even the Ramirez twins knocked one afternoon to ask if they could help her color. Sophie, now healing and fitted with a temporary prosthetic, stood at the edge of the driveway with a pink piece of chalk in her hand and simply nodded. She didn't need to say anything. Her art spoke for her. A week later, Whitney Kim returned for a follow-up segment. She titled it, "From Chalk to Change the Girl Who Bloomed Through Concrete." The piece went national. Letters poured in. Strangers from all over sent Sophie art supplies, custom chalk set sketch pads. A retired prosthetist from Oregon offered to build Sophie a new custom leg free of charge. A local arts foundation announced they'd fund a sidewalk mural project in Desert Bloom Hills with Sophie as the lead artist. I watched her work one afternoon, hair tied up in a messy bun, surrounded by kids tracing sunflowers and dandelions while she outlined a phoenix in full bloom. It stretched nearly 20 feet across the park entrance tulip petals, forming the wings fire blooming from chalk. At the center, she drew a single word in gold grow. That night, I sat on our porch holding Lana's hand, watching Sophie laugh under the lamplight chalk dust on her cheek. I'd spent my life talking people down from chaos, but I'd never felt this kind of peace. This wasn't just a neighborhood anymore, it was a garden, and she had planted every seed with color. As for Marcia, she sold her house, vanished overnight, her plastic flamingos and ironclad rules nothing but a bitter footnote in the community newsletter. Some said she'd moved in with a sister in Colorado. Others said she was lawyering up. I didn't care. Let her check every window for FBI vans. Let her see tulips in every crack of the sidewalk, because the message was clear. She lost. And Sophie. She won in every way that matters. She didn't just reclaim the sidewalk, she turned it into a canvas. And with every petal, she reminded this neighborhood and the world that even in the driest desert, beauty can bloom. So if you ever walk through Desert Bloom Hills and see a phoenix rising from tulips, you'll know what happened here. And if you're holding a piece of chalk, don't just watch. Draw, bloom, grow. In a world where rules are sometimes used to control rather than to protect, this story reminds us of the quiet power of resilience, love, and community. Sophie Briggs, a 13-year-old girl who had already endured more than most, used chalk to reclaim joy, and a garden bloomed from her courage. When an HOA president chose cruelty over compassion, it was her family, her art, and eventually her neighbors who stood firm and said enough. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Never underestimate the strength of someone fighting for something they love. Whether it's a child with a piece of chalk or a parent with a camera, justice begins when we choose not to stay silent in the face of wrong. Sometimes defending beauty, whether it's a tulip drawn on a sidewalk or the spirit of a child, is an act of resistance. And it's one worth showing up for. To every viewer listening to this story, if someone in your life, especially a young person, is expressing themselves through art, color, or creativity, protect that light. Stand up for it. In neighborhoods, in schools, and public spaces, let children bloom. We live in a world that often moves too fast, too harshly, and too gray. Be the person who welcomes the color. And if you're ever in a position of power, whether as a leader, a neighbor, or simply as an adult, use that power to lift others, not tear them down. To the parents out there, don't be afraid to document everything when something feels wrong. Keep the receipts, take the videos, build the case, but above all, protect your kid's spirit with every breath you've got. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when it comes, it's worth it. And to those who may have once stayed silent like Sophie's neighbors, we all make mistakes. What matters is how we show up afterward. Redemption starts the moment we stop pretending not to see. From all of us here at Us, Justice Stories, thank you for watching, for caring, and for standing with families like the Briggs. Your support helps stories like Sophie's reach the people who need to hear them. If you've ever faced injustice or know someone who has, share your story. Speak up. Because every time we shine a light, another shadow fades. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it moved you. And remember, even in the driest, harshest places, color can still bloom, tulips can still grow, and justice, no matter how delayed, always leaves a mark. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next story.